Hi guys, welcome to the Classes Corner. I'm Kat, and this week I'm going to be talking about episode 5 of Troy, Fall of a City. This episode is Hunted, and as far as I'm concerned, in this episode is the first episode in the series that has really gone off text, which basically means for me it's that in this episode most of the events don't really have a ancient textual basis. So basically most of the episode is the writers or the creators of Troy Fall of a City's invention. You know, they've made it up for the show. And I feel like if I talk about that, if I talk about like, oh well this, and again, this is just as far as I'm concerned, some of the stuff might actually have texts that, because again, every ancient writer has pretty much a version of the Trojan myth, so, and I haven't read everything, so if there is something that has a textual base that I'm like, oh, they've just made that up, then please correct me. If you guys know, pop it down below. I would love to read those texts and engage with them and, you know, and get more stuff in. So, but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, most of this episode is the creators of the show's own invention for their own narrative purposes. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If I go, you know, oh well this is different, or they've changed this, or they're making this up, then that's actually not a criticism of the show. Whether or not that stuff that they make up works in reference to their own story, or if people like it or not, then that's sort of separate to how valid it is as an act of classical reception, which is classical reception being the act of receiving things from the ancient world and interpreting in their own way. So there's sort of a thing with that. So this episode 5, Hunted, is really the episode where the creators have gone really off ancient text. Like, this really started at the end of last episode with the duel between Paris and Menelaus. I actually had a really good reread of that scene from the Iliad this week. So there's a few things on that from, I actually talk about from the last episode, like in the Iliad, it's actually Paris that sort of jumps out from the Trojan forces and go like, oh, fight anyone! And then Menelaus steps forward and he's like, oh no I won't! And then Hector has to be like, yeah, no you will. And then he's like, oh no, now I will, and he steps up, and then when he is about to lose the duel, Aphrodite basically picks him up, whooshes him away back to his bedroom, makes him all pretty and perfumed, and basically he's just fine, seconded in the walls of Troy. The divine intervention is a lot more explicit in the Iliad. So basically from the point, and then he has an entirely different storyline with Helen and that stuff happens. So basically from the beginning of, from the end of last episode to the entirety of this episode, all of Paris's stuff is made up for the show. Paris's storyline doesn't have any textual reference, so I'm not really going to talk about it a lot. Same with Helen's storyline, but because Paris isn't whooshed back to his bedroom, he doesn't have an encounter with her that they have in the Iliad, so all of Helen's storyline is basically, again, an invention for the show. So is Hector's, as far as I can concern, so is Andromache, so is Priam and Hecabe's. All of the Trojan stuff is has basically been a show owns invention. And again, that's fine, because people can interpret these myths in different ways. Ancient writers did it all the time. Literally, there's a satire play by Euripides called Helen, which says that Helen wasn't actually at Troy at all. She was whooshed away by Aphrodite, and then a shade of Helen, like a hologram fake Helen, went to Troy in her place, and the real Helen was actually in Egypt the whole time, being like, oh well, my reputation is just basically gone now, and you know, I missed my daughter growing up and my husband, and I don't even know this Paris guy, I'm just in Egypt and all this stuff is happening without me. So there are literally Trojan myths where Helen doesn't go to Troy. So Troy Fall of a City inventing new stuff is not disrespectful to the ancient text. It's just, you know, the show says it's inspired by Homer and the Greek myths, so they're under no obligation to really keep events from ancient Greek myths. Whether or not you think that they work or not as story beats, that's sort of up to you as a viewer of the show. I have my own feelings about it. To be honest, I'm not that engaged with the new additions, but again, that's just me. That's just a thing. So lots of the Greek storyline is also now invented because the Trojan storyline is so altered, particularly in reference to them attacking Troy now in this episode, and how they're sort of relating to the character of Briseis and Achilles and all of that sort of stuff. One instance that is in the Iliad, or at least based on an episode from the Iliad, is in this episode Nestor and Odysseus go to Achilles to try and get him to come back to the fighting because they're going to go attack Troy, or they think the Trojans are going to attack them on the beach. Which is in the Iliad, the Trojans do actually attack them on the beach. It's an entirely sort of different set of circumstances, but you know, there is a Trojan attack and the Greek forces do lose a lot. They become very acutely aware that they're in trouble and they need Achilles back. So what happens is, like in the show, Nestor and Odysseus go, but also a third member of the party goes called Phoenix. This is in episode 9 of the Iliad, which is the embassy to Achilles. Episode 9? It's in book 9 of the Iliad. It's the episode books, whatever. It's, yeah, book 9 of the Iliad. It's the embassy to Achilles. And yeah, Odysseus, Nestor, and a guy called Phoenix goes to persuade Achilles to join the fighting again. It goes actually a little bit differently, because at this point, Agamemnon's pride has sort of been knocked a lot, and he's like, okay, no, I'll give Briseis back, I'll give all prizes to Achilles back, you know, we do need him, you know, I'll make a promise that I haven't touched Briseis, that she's still, you know, as Achilles left her, if you will, which, you know, we need Achilles. And then Achilles, when he hears, like, the fact that his honour will be repaid, you know, he's going to get his prizes back, Achilles still goes, no, I won't fight, basically, because he's questioning mortality and whether it's worth it or not to actually fight at Troy, and he says he's going to take him and his Myrmidons home, basically. And Phoenix, the character which isn't in the show, is sort of like a substitute father figure to Achilles. He, you know, sort of was in Pythia with Achilles growing up. He's known him for a very long time, so they feel like he could persuade Achilles, but ultimately he doesn't. So going into the embassy of Achilles, it is very different from the text, because there's a lot of other stuff surrounding it. A lot more stuff has happened on the Greek side. So yeah, but we do have sort of an embassy to Achilles where Nestor and Odysseus go, oh, we need to fight, we need you, you know, will you do it? And then when he says no, they just sort of go, oh, okay, you know, selfish person, you know, and then leave. As opposed to sort of several long speeches and stories and humming and hawing and whining and all that, which is in the embassy to Achilles. And ultimately, I feel like what the show is doing with Achilles, and again, this isn't a criticism, it's just a comparison between the Iliad Achilles and this Achilles, is that this Achilles is a lot more stoic. Achilles in the Iliad cries just all the time. He's a lot more emotional, and I think that's potentially standards of masculinity. There is a difference there. And he's crying and he's a lot more contemplative. Maybe it's because this show is focusing so much more on the Trojan side, we don't necessarily see all of Achilles' intentions and what he wants, because ultimately Achilles' story is about the fact that he will die young. The show, again, more focused on the fact that he was offended that Briseis was taken from him for Briseis' sake rather than the sake of a prize and his own honour. But in the Iliad, he is very concerned because he's prophesied to die young. As far as he's concerned, he should have been Zeus's son rather than Peleus' son, because his mother and Zeus almost had a thing going on there, but there was a prophecy that if Zeus had a son, he'd be the most powerful hero, and then it would be like a Kronos situation. So Zeus ultimately married her off to a mortal, Thetis off to a mortal, so there's a situation that goes on there. Achilles, you know, there's a lot of things that go into Achilles which isn't really in the show. One of the things, this Achilles hasn't cried yet. Crying is a big part of Achilles' character or characterization in the poem. He's just basically a bit more stoic, a little bit more reserved. There are a few hints. For example, Achilles goes to, you know, Odysseus says, oh, the gods are behind us, or, you know, or the gods will see how this goes, and Achilles like, oh, what do they know of the gods? So that's maybe a hint to his more divine connections and his more divine storyline later on. But I'm wondering how it's going to go with certain things like Patroclus' death, because we're not really seeing the full interaction between Achilles and Patroclus, and the full sort of weight of Achilles' choice to not join in the fighting, and his own choice as sort of a demigod, as the son of a, there's a lot of things that go in there. So there is a question of how impactful the anger of Achilles and the grief of Achilles storyline is going to go, with so much more focus on the Trojan side of it. And again, that's not a criticism, it's just a question of how it'll work. I mean, the fact that they're maybe more explicitly portraying them as lovers will have more weight to Patroclus' death to Achilles for the audience to really understand his grief, in lieu of some of the more ancient parts of it, which might be a bit sort of not relatable to a modern audience. And again, that's fine, because people can interpret these things how they want to, and creators can sort of do what they want with a specific storyline. Again, for a classicist, it's sometimes a bit distracting, because you're like, oh, well, this should happen, and then this should happen, and this should happen, because you're so familiar with the text. But really, it is a show that can do what it wants with the material. I'm going to be proved a massive hypocrite if they do one scene in a certain way later on in the series, and I won't spoil that for you and my reaction to it. Or if they do one scene in a certain way, I might have problems with it, and that'll probably come through. But as a classicist, objectively, this is just what they're doing with the text. Yeah, ultimately that's the Greek side of it. This episode, Paris and yeah, again, like I said, Paris hasn't really got anything to do with any textual things from the Iliad or any other ancient Greek myths as far as I'm aware, but I do want to plug a text with the character of Oenone. She was in I realised she was in the first episode, so maybe I should have talked about her there, but there was a lot going on in the first episode, but Noe is mentioned by name again in this episode. Paris comes across her and he sort of travels around the hills after he's escaped Troy. And the character of Noe in myth, she is a nymph. She is the daughter of a river god, as far as I'm aware, a naiad. And she is Paris's first wife. And why I want to plug a particular text is because there is a great poem from Noe's perspective, Oenone to Paris, from Ovid's Heroides. Now it's a Latin text, and I feel like the Heroides is sometimes overlooked in terms of text about Troy. It's basically a series of poems from heroines, ancient Greek or Roman heroines, to their lovers or to their important male figures, and Oenone to Paris is one of them. It's a really great text, and I feel like there's a thing from Paris to Menelaus, or Paris to Menelaus, Helen to Menelaus, or Helen to Paris. There is Penelope to Odysseus. There is Hermione to Orestes. There's a few really good Trojan perspectives in there from women. It's still written by a man, but it's lots of women's perspectives. It's a really good text, so I'm just going to plug that here and hope people sort of go and check it out with Oenone as a character. So yes, there's that. And then another thing which I feel like I haven't really talked about is Cassandra. Cassandra had more of a role in this episode with, she has a few more interactions with Helen, with Paris, when she didn't with Paris, about Paris, with Hector and Priam and Hecabe, and sort of more about Cassandra, because I haven't really mentioned her yet. And Cassandra is an interesting figure because obviously people sort of know Cassandra by reputation. You know, she was born with sight, and then because she wouldn't sleep with Apollo, he basically cursed her to always tell the truth but never to be believed, which isn't really a thing I feel like they're going into with this, with the series. Maybe we'll get more of that later. So yeah, I feel like so maybe we'll see more of that sort of side of this in the show maybe later, but so far we haven't seen that much of that side of it. There's a few texts that mention Cassandra and her gifts. Two texts that I know of specifically, the Iliad mentions it her gift a little bit. Again, she's sort of wandering around and not really believed. She's in a scene where the women of Troy sacrifice to Athena and then are ignored. She is also in a play called Agamemnon as part of the Oresteia, where she explains her prophecy a little bit more, and then she prophesizes Agamemnon's death because she is taken as a slave by Agamemnon. Back to Mycenae. So there's a little, so that you do get some textual references from her, but I feel like Cassandra is more known by general ideas of her powers rather than specific instance of texts. I mean, like I said, the Agamemnon is one of the clearest when it comes to her character. So maybe we'll see more of that side of it and how she is affected by the war. So yeah, I feel like that's sort of going forward, maybe an interesting thing. Hector gets a bit more characterization, but not a lot of it is from the Iliad. Again, most of his characterization as sort of a family man from the Iliad is with interactions with Andromache and his son. His son is obviously not born yet, and there is some characterization with him as Andromache, but really in this episode you can sort of see him taking up the leaderly role, which even though he is the leader of the Trojan army in the Iliad, he never sort of takes control of the city in the same way that he's sort of done in this episode with his relationship with Priam. There's a lot more familial conflict in this episode with the Trojan side than there ever actually is in the Iliad itself. I'm not sure how in other if there are other texts that sort of specify a familial conflict within the Trojan royal family. Like I said, if anyone knows any texts that I'm sort of missing talking about in this series at all, please pop it down below. I would love to check them out and have a discussion about them. So yeah, this episode sort of light on things to talk about in terms of specific texts. Like I said, people can do what they want with these myths, so it's not a criticism, but I'll be interested to see if they get more on track with classical sources in the next episode, or if they continue doing their own thing. And again, it's not wrong of them to do their own thing, it just means I don't get to waffle on for as long as I normally do. So I will see you guys next week. If you like this episode, please like, share and subscribe, and if you want to talk about anything in the comments, just pop it down below, and I will see you then. Bye guys!